from Oregon is recognized. Gentleman from Oregon has 4.5 minutes. Gentleman from New York has 2 minutes.
I'll reserve for the moment.
Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm prepared to close. Will you close, or do you have another speaker?
I don't know. Do you want to say? And who ends up being the one to close on this?
Gentleman from New York has the right to close.
Okay.
So I will defer to you, and
you're done with speakers?
And I have no more speakers, so I will defer to you, and then I will take my 2 minutes to close.
All right, perfect.
Okay. Gentleman from New York reserves his time. Gentleman from Oregon is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume. I think this has been a good and thoughtful and lively debate because I think we've been able to show each other, through you, Mr. Speaker, the fact that the House did its work. House Republicans put forward a proposal to extend unemployment benefits for a full year, and we paid for it. We put forward a proposal to give working middle-class taxpayers a reduction in the amount they pay into Social Security, but we backfilled that money so that Social Security's trust fund was not depleted. And we said to our physicians out there who take care of our seniors that they would have certainty and not face a 27.4% cut in their reimbursement rates under Medicare, and that they would have that certainty for 2 full years. So the facts are clear what the House passed. We also included in this legislation to try and drive new job creation in the high-tech sector by auctioning off spectrum that would generate $16.7 billion and upwards of 700,000 jobs. That's the high-end number, but let's say it's half that. I mean, there are estimates all over the place. But a few 100,000 jobs would be a really great thing, especially in technology and innovation and everything that would come from that. That's in this bill. And what we got back from the Senate was 2 months. 2 months. 2 months. And a failure to even come to the table. So the Republican conferees from the House have been willing to meet anytime, anywhere. And in fact, under Chairman Camp's leadership, we have met in public with our counterparts. And frankly, we've had some good discussions across the table. I want to make that clear as well. Between Republicans and Democrats, House and Senate, those of us on the conference committee, I think you would say, even though we may have disagreements, we've had good discussions. And now we need to get the work done. And in order to get the work done, we have to have some alternative proposals from the Senate, which hopefully we're going to get, maybe even tonight. I think that would be helpful, because then we would know what their position is, because this is kind of a different sort of conference. We had a year bill, they had a 2-month bill, and most of that 2-month bill became law. So it's been kind of an awkward conference for the Senate to try and figure out how to do this, and the House has a full year or 2-year extension, depending upon the items at issue here. So we'll meet again tomorrow at 10 o'clock, is my understanding, in conference, either in private or in public. I don't know. That'll be up to the chairman. But in any way, I don't care when or where. I'm ready. Mr. Reed from New York, who spoke earlier, is ready. My other conferees are ready. We were ready in December to get this done. We really were, and we still are. And we are committed to the working American people and those who are trying to struggle and find jobs to make sure they have that unemployment insurance. They deserve that. They need that. And we're committed to providing that. So, Mr. Speaker, on that note, I don't think there will be any objection on this floor to approving your motion to instruct conferees to get their work done by the 17th. I'll certainly support it, as I have and nearly everyone in the House has. And I yield back the balance of my time, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I will close. Let me just make it unmistakably clear. There is not a single Democrat that is advocating diminishing the Social Security Trust Fund. We all agree that the Social Security Trust Fund must be made whole, and that is why we are fully accepting of the fact that this tax cut, unlike every other tax cut that's been passed in this chamber in the last 10 years, should be fully paid for so that the Social Security Trust Fund is not diminished. Secondly, I want to thank Mr. Walden and Mr. Reed for their service on the conference committee. It cannot be an easy conference, and I would just ask that as you go forward, you be guided by what Leader Cantor has said. What Leader Cantor has said is that we should pass what we can agree on, and we should leave the issues on which we can't agree to another day. And it certainly appears as if we agree that we need to extend the payroll tax deduction, we need to fix the SGR, and we need to pass unemployment unemployment insurance, and so let's pass it. Let's leave to another day contentious issues like mercury emissions, like the Keystone Pipeline, like drug testing. Let's pass what we can agree on. Let's debate those other issues. They're important. They deserve a full debate, but let's not let them stand in the way of a tax cut for 160 million Americans and access to Medicare physicians for 50 million Americans and keeping millions of Americans at least with some lifeline with respect to unemployment insurance. And so I urge my colleagues to support this motion to recommit. I thank Mr. Walden for a spirited debate, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time, all time having expired. Without objection, the previous question is ordered. The question is on the motion to instruct. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker?
Have it. Gentleman from New York.
I requested yeas and nays on that.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. The chair is now prepared to entertain requests for 1-minute speeches. Does the gentleman from California rise? Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our Capitol Hill community has endured a great loss this week with the passing of our dear friend Frank Cushing. Frank passed away early Monday morning after a year-long battle with cancer. He was 59 years old. Frank Cushing left his mark on public policy through more than 30 years of public service in the House and the Senate. For those people who understand just how important fine staff are to our ability in the House and the Senate to more effectively serve our public, I know of no public servant who has greater respect in this community, indeed around the country, than Frank Cushing. We will be holding a memorial service commemorating Frank's work on our behalf next Monday at 3 p.m. The details regarding that service will be in the revised congressional record. I urge all members who know and love Frank Cushing to come together and focus upon his service. I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentle lady from California rise?
To address the House for 1 minute and revise.
Without objection, a gentle lady from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, there are few things more universal to the health and lives of women than birth control. It is basic health care. It's essential to women's economic independence and professional fulfillment. In fact, with the swearing in of our new colleague from Oregon, we now have 94 women in Congress. My guess is there would be about half that number without the benefit of contraceptives. And that all began 40 or 50 years ago. So when the Speaker said this morning that Congress must overturn the President's policy acting on behalf of the American people, I'm not really sure what he's talking about, because the President's decision is on the right side of common sense, sound science, and public opinion. It enjoys support from a majority of Americans and a majority of Catholics. And let me add that many of my House colleagues who want to deny access to contraception are the same ones who want to cut programs that help women and families facing unwanted pregnancies. I applaud the President for standing up to reactionary forces and standing up for women's health care and women's freedom. I yield back.
Expired. Are there any further requests for 1-minute speeches? Seeing no further requests, under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5th, 2011, the gentle lady from New York, Ms. Slaughter, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, from Main Street to Wall Street, it's common knowledge that insider trading of stocks is a crime. In 2004, celebrity homemaker Martha Stewart was sentenced to 5 months in prison. And in 2011, Wall Street titan Rodney Alexander Amendment was sentenced to 11 years in prison for profiting for stocks bought and sold on insider information. Despite these headline-grabbing convictions when it comes to members of Congress, the law of the land clearly does not apply. In the halls of Congress, there are no clear laws preventing members of Congress from using their public office to obtain insider information and trade stocks for private enrichment. We thought we had a chance, Mr. Speaker, last week when the Senate passed the Stock Act with 96-3, that the House would have a chance to follow and that we would be moving forward to remedy that wrong. We were unfortunately very much wrong. We had had a markup 2 months ago in December on the Stock Act, and at the last moment the bill was snatched away, the meeting was adjourned, and we heard no more. After the Senate passed the bill, the House had decided that they indeed would pass one any time it was going to be strengthened and made better. We discovered yesterday that what was going to happen was that we would no longer have a freestanding bill, but instead we would have a suspension bill. Let me take just a second to explain the difference between those two bills. We would have had an opportunity under a regular bill to be able to amend it, and we would have been given the right to recommit. Under suspension, we can do nothing but vote it up or down. This bill, which has the most support that I've seen in my 20 years in Congress, more editorial support all over this country and even parts of Europe than you can even imagine, was simply taken away. And was it made stronger? Absolutely not. We said yesterday that we were afraid that the euphemism for making stronger meant that the bill would be gutted, and indeed it was. The part called political intelligence, which is an investment that people make in getting political intelligence from members of Congress and their staff, yields $402 million a year just simply from information traded from members of Congress and sold to the clients of hedge fund dealers. We're pretty disappointed about that. It happened in the dark of night. We didn't even know what was going to be in the bill till 10:30. And I was really pleased today to hear from both Senator Grassley and Senator Leahy of their great disappointment at what the House had done. And we are demanding that we have a conference on these two bills so that we can have an opportunity to keep political intelligence in that bill because of its major importance. In fact, if we do nothing, this totally unregulated industry will simply continue to prosper in the shadows with no one watching. In a way, the Stock Act is a statement of how we view ourselves, and it certainly is the relationship to those that we serve. It's a reflection of our role as public citizens and knowledge that while we may receive the honors and power conferred by our service, we ourselves are equal in our rights and responsibilities just to every other single American citizen. No matter how powerful our position, no matter how hallowed the walls we walk, no one here is above the law. With the passage of the Stock Act, Congress could have moved one step closer to living up to the faith and trust bestowed upon us by the American people, the citizens for whom we serve. Unfortunately, that has been snatched away from us at the 13th hour. We are hoping either for a reconsideration by the leadership of this House or that we can, with the help of the senators that I've mentioned, be able to demand a conference between the two houses on the bill they've passed and the travesty that we will be passing here. I reserve the balance of my time and yield to Mr. Walz.
Well, I thank the gentlelady, Mr. Speaker. The gentlelady from New York has a long history of service and was concerned about ethics before ethics were in vogue and certainly before 60 Minutes came on. All of us here and joining in this People's House, the incredible honor and responsibility and privilege that are given by our neighbors. We gather in here as teachers and soldiers, as microbiologists, as new members, attorneys who join us here, and we're sent here from across this nation, from the plains of Minnesota to the high rises of New York City, to to the beautiful areas of Oregon, our newest members joining us tonight. And the responsibility of standing here and self-governing calls the responsibility of us to conduct ourselves in a manner not just equal to every other member, every other citizen, but to a higher level. And the absolute perception, whether real or not, the perception that members of Congress or elected officials are somehow using their office to profit or somehow tipping people to profit for themselves is not only an affront to our neighbors who sent us here, it's a cancer on the democracy. This institution and deliberative self-government will survive long before us. The giants who came before us and the words that we stand in front of, they will last into the future. This institution requires us to conduct ourselves in this manner. So that's why, coming from the high school classroom as a teacher, one of the first people I met in this chamber was the gentlewoman from New York. And she knew that I was sent here to try and do things differently. Yes, to be passionate about how we see our political differences, to be passionate about how we educate our children, how we care for our veterans, how we build our highways, how we bring about a system of health care that's fair, and to respect our neighbors and to respect our colleagues on the other side of the aisle for their differences. But what's happened and what the American people have lost faith in is not the idea of democracy, but the idea that we're all play by the rules. So I think it's important when the lady from New York speaks and speaks about this idea of tightening the rules on insider trading, she's talking about protecting the democracy. She's talking about making sure no one gains access so that when the teacher walks through the door, when the microbiologist walks through the door, when the attorney walks through the door, and they're representing 650,000 people in their district, that those constituents know the decisions we make are based on what's best for the nation. The things we talk about are not being used to enrich someone personally, because it's not only wrong, and now after tomorrow we're going to hopefully say illegal, it also is so undermining to the system. So I think this debate and this decision we have, the gentlewoman's point goes much deeper than what's possible politically. It's what's required of us. And what we're asking for, and what the gentle lady has so eloquently talked about, is just give us the opportunity to talk this through. The genius of this system put us here, it put the senators on the other side of this great Capitol, and it told us to get together. They passed a piece of legislation. We compromised over here with something. Let's bring them together. And the argument being made on political intelligence and supporting the system is absolutely correct. I think today, and I want to be very clear, Mr. Speaker, none of us here are patting ourselves on the back and saying, look it, we passed the Stock Act. The gentlelady's worked at it for 6 years. It feels like a sense of accomplishment, not for her, for me, or our colleagues here who have been stalwart supporters. It's an affirmation to the American public that the system works. And they owe us to do the best job we can before we move that forward. So this isn't good job, we passed a bill to do the right thing. Americans live by this rule every day. What we did was we closed a loophole that existed, and we went further and talked about how could this be construed to enrich others and corrupt the democracy. So you're hearing terms like political intelligence. What we're saying is do it in the light of day. Sunshine cures many ills. And so I support the gentlelady's point. I support it because I know it didn't come about by a born-again ethics. It came about by years and a lifetime of not giving the sermon, but living the sermon. So I ask my colleagues, listen to what's being said here, take this into consideration, compromise, get this to the Senate, and then let's give the American public a real unique gift in this political environment. A win on something important that makes them believe that things can be better. We owe that to them. So I thank the gentlelady, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back balance of my time to the lead author of Stock Act.
I'm pleased now to yield time to my good friend and fellow New Yorker, Ms. Maloney.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding and for her hard work on this issue and many others. Mr. Speaker, I am really very pleased that we are finally working to address the insider trading issue in this body and that it will finally be on the floor tomorrow. We should not have had to wait so long for a bill that has 270 co-sponsors, and I am proud to be one of them, and I have been in past Congresses. I want to thank my colleague from New York, Louise Slaughter, who has worked on this legislation for 6 long years, and my colleague from Minnesota, Mr. Waltz, for their excellent leadership, perseverance on this issue. Mr. Speaker, I have said it before, elected officials must be like Caesar's wife in avoiding the appearance of impropriety. The need to expressly prohibit this activity in statute cannot be overstated. Insider trading is illegal on Wall Street, and it should be illegal on Capitol Hill. The Stock Act is bipartisan, common-sense legislation to prohibit federally elected officials from profiting on non-public information they receive through their legislative duties. This is long overdue reform of how Washington does business, and the American people deserve and expect us to pass it swiftly. Regretfully, the bill introduced by the Republican majority does nothing to regulate the political intelligence community. In fact, when they wrote their version of the Stock Act, and they did not go through regular order, it should have gone through the Financial Services Committee on which I serve and others, the Republican leadership did not consult with the bipartisan coalition that has championed this bill for years. They did not mention anything to Mr. Waltz or Ms. Slaughter, and as a result, they introduced a flawed bill. This bill is weaker, not stronger, and it has been denounced by Senator Grassley and Senator Leahy. Like the lobbyists before them, political intelligence operatives use a proximity to power to serve high-paying clients. Unlike lobbyists, these operatives are nameless. Under current law, they are not required to identify themselves as they go about their work. And we know all too well what happens when Congress and K Street work in the dark. I join my colleague, Congresswoman Slaughter and Congressman Waltz, in calling for a conference committee where Senators Leahy and Grassley and also a bipartisan coalition here in the House can work together to make sure that the political intelligence community is covered by this bill. I thank my colleagues for their hard work, and I will join them in working to make this stronger, to really return it to the strong form that my colleagues drafted. I yield back to Louise Slaughter.
Thank you so much. Mr. Speaker, it is with great pleasure and absolute delight that I am able to yield to the next speaker, who is a newly minted member of Congress for just a little more than 24 hours, Suzanne Bonamici from Oregon.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Congresswoman Slaughter, for this opportunity. I want to thank you for yielding to me this evening to speak about this important bill. Congressman Waltz and Congresswoman Slaughter's leadership on this issue has been remarkable. Thank you so much for your tireless efforts. The idea behind the Stock Act is simple. Members of Congress, their staff, and other government officials should not be using their access in Washington to enrich themselves on Wall Street. I am already a proud co-sponsor of H.R. 1148, a bill that rightfully enjoys broad bipartisan support. The protection of the integrity of our government institutions is not a partisan issue. It is fundamental to our democracy. The Stock Act is one critical step we can take to make it clear to our constituents back home that we, like them, will not tolerate the types of activities that we were all shocked to read about in the press. The trust that my constituents have placed in me is something that I take very seriously. As public servants, we are here to work for the people, not outside firms looking to profit, and certainly not to make a quick buck for ourselves. When you hear about scandals like this, it's no wonder the public has so little confidence in our institutions of government. If we want to restore citizens' faith and earn back their trust, we must make sure that everyone is playing by the rules. As I mentioned yesterday in my remarks to this House during the incredibly warm welcome I received as its newest member, we have a fundamental belief in this country that if you work hard and play by the rules, you can succeed. The reports of past insider trading make clear that the rules, as they apply to members of Congress and others in the public sphere with respect to their Wall Street dealings, are not sufficient. The Stock Act improves the rules to ensure not only that they are sufficient, but there are consequences for breaking those rules. I'm proud to join with my colleagues both in support of the Stock Act and in the recent effort to bring the bill forward for consideration by the House. Now, it's my understanding that we're going to see an altered version on the floor before we conclude this week's business. Now, I'm surprised to learn as a new member that no amendments will be allowed on such an important bill. Although the weakening or elimination of certain key provisions, such as the political intelligence language, is deeply disappointing, I remain committed to the effort of ensuring that all of us in public office play by the same rules as the people who have entrusted us with the privilege of being their voice in Washington. I look forward to continuing to work with my colleagues to restore our constituents' confidence in their representatives and in their government institutions. Thank you very much, and I yield back my time.
And I'm pleased now to yield to the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Loebsack.
I thank the gentlelady, Ms. Slaughter, and I thank her effort and the effort on of Congressman Walz as well for initially bringing this bill forward at a time when we had not heard about some of the things we heard on 60 Minutes, at a time when really nobody was paying attention to this issue. These two folks had the courage to bring this forward, and I want to thank them for that. I was really proud to be the fourth co-sponsor of this legislation back in May, at least the version that we're talking about tonight, not the current version that's on the floor. I really think that it's absolutely urgent that we fix the current loophole that, as was already mentioned by so many of my colleagues, that allows members of Congress to use information that they obtain in a non-public fashion for their own financial benefit. This is something that, on the face of it, simply makes no sense that we should allow that to happen. Not in a democracy, not certainly in Congress, in this institution. It was mentioned that this institution is not much respected right now. In fact, the latest Gallup poll today showed us at 10%, showed Congress at 10%. And it's not surprising, given the stories that we've heard, given the problems that we've seen in this country, and especially when we have something like the Stock Act in front of us, and there's bickering going on, that this thing is not being passed as quickly as it should have been passed. And that now we find that my good friend and my colleague, Senator Grassley from Iowa, is upset as well, because, as was mentioned, the political intelligence loophole is there at the moment as well. That's got to stop. We've got to pass the bill here in the House. We've got to do what we can to have a conference committee that's going to have real teeth, that's going to take care of that loophole. Senator Grassley is exactly right about that. We've got to show the American people that we in Congress play by the same rules that they do, that we're not above the American people. So when we go home to our districts, as I do every week, every weekend I'm home, people have faith in us. They have confidence in the institution of Congress, and that they know, as we should, that we play by the same rules as they do. And I want to thank Congresswoman Slaughter and Congressman Walz for organizing the special orders tonight, and I'm very, very proud. This is only the second time that I've done this since I've been in Congress. This is my 6th year. But I couldn't be more proud than to come up here and to speak on this very important issue. And as I said, I do it because the people in Iowa, the people in my district, tell me this is the right thing to do. Thank you, and I yield back the remainder of my time. Thank you.
I yield back the balance of my time.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5th, 2011, the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Lowy, will control the remainder of the hour.
Mr. Speaker, some decisions are just too important to be based on fear of political repercussions. That is why it is gratifying that President Obama heeded the advice of the Institute of Medicine and concluded that given its importance to women's health, contraception should be covered by health insurance as a free preventive service for all American women. To accommodate religious institutions, the administration appropriately exempted places of worship from requirements to cover contraceptives in their health plans. The rule strikes a delicate balance, respecting the rights of both religions ideologically opposed to birth control and American women. Let me be clear. No one will be required to use contraceptives. The rule simply allows women to exercise their own conscience when it comes to their health, and the vast majority of American women already do. It would be a grave mistake to make it more difficult to access medically recommended services for the 99% of all women who have used contraception in their lifetime. The administration was absolutely right to stand up for women's health by protecting access to contraception.
You just say you're going to yield to me.
I yield to Congresswoman Slaughter from New York.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding. Mr. Speaker, I want to commend President Obama and Health and Human Services Secretary Sebelius for including contraception as a preventive service that health insurance plans are required to cover at no cost. This decision, based on the recommendation of the Institute of Medicine, is the right decision for women. It affirms the individual freedom of women to make choices about their health and their future. Following the administration's decision, there has been an uproar from the religious community. While some claim that it is in violation of First Amendment rights, the simple truth is that this decision upholds the First Amendment rights of millions of women to not have their reproductive health managed by religiously affiliated organizations who may not share their own beliefs. This decision stands up for women's freedom. It is a woman's right to decide when and how she wants to have a family, whether or not she chooses to use birth control, as 98% of Catholics do. If she subscribes to a religion that teaches against the use of birth control, then she is free to choose not to use it either. If she would rather use birth control for the many health protections and benefits that it provides, such as the fibroid tumors, migraine headaches, and bleeding that cannot be controlled, she should also be free to do so. Either way, the choice should belong to her and to her alone. It is also important to note the details of the administration's decision. We're not talking about churches or organizations that exist for the sole purpose of teaching their religion. These organizations are totally exempt from providing coverage for contraceptions. What we are talking about is religiously affiliated organizations such as hospitals, schools, and universities. Millions of women are employed by these types of organizations, and those women do not necessarily share the beliefs of their employers. In fact, I think one of the most egregious things felt by many women is that whatever their own religion teaches, they are not going to be allowed to go by that. Catholic hospitals can and do, and we want them to, employ Baptists, Methodists, Protestants, Muslims, Jews, Buddhists, agnostics, and atheists. Teachers, cafeteria workers, and administrative staff members at religious schools and universities are not necessarily members of that religion. Those employers should not have the right to decide whether or not the women on their insurance plans can access birth control. They still have separation of church and state. Many religions that teach against the use of birth control also teach against divorce. But institutions affiliated with those religions are not allowed to discriminate against employees based on their marital status. They do not have an exemption from labor laws of their religious belief. This is no different. The recent decision by the administration shows that they are standing with women and supporting their freedom to make the choices that impact themselves and their families. Surveys have repeatedly shown that women and men across this country support providing access to contraception at no cost, and that support is equally strong among members of the very religions that are fighting this decision. I applaud the President and Secretary Sebelius for supporting the health and freedom of women and support their decision to put women's personal health and freedom first. Thank Ms. Lowy.
Mr. Speaker, when it comes to religious exemptions, a balance must be struck. The rights of religious followers must be protected while also respecting the beliefs of others who may be impacted by a religious exemption. Take, for example, a Catholic university where Jews, Hindus, Muslims, and non-religious followers work. Should these individuals be denied access to contraception even though their faiths do not oppose it? If we expand the religious exemption too far and allow religiously affiliated institutions to deny contraception to their employees regardless of their religious beliefs, we begin to see the beliefs and rights of those who support and require contraception infringed upon. As policymakers, we have to stand up for the rights of all of our constituents, regardless of their faith. This means making policies that walk the line between protecting the rights of primarily religious institutions while also protecting the rights of individuals employed by religiously affiliated institutions. The administration's exemption strikes that balance. I yield to Ms. Davis.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to applaud the final ruling issued by the Department of Health and Human Services to include birth control at no cost. The pill changed the world. As some have said, it was one small pill, but one giant leap for womankind. It improved women's health. It reduced infant mortality. It increased a woman's earning potential. It empowered families to chart their own course. Yet, currently, 1 in 3 American women struggle to afford birth control. A woman's right to decide when to start a family is meaningless if she does not have the means to make a choice. All these benefits could be denied because of a relatively small amount of money, and that's simply unacceptable. I'm pleased that we're living up to the promises made in the Affordable Care Act, and I urge my colleagues to join me in protecting and increasing access to health care for every woman in America. I yield back.
Okay. Thank you.
I yield to Representative Maloney.
Thank you. I rise in support of the President's action and Secretary Sebelius' action in Health and Human Services to allow birth control benefit for working women across this country. This birth control benefit increases access to preventive health care while respecting religious freedom. Taking this benefit away would be devastating for millions of workers. And this is accepted practice in 28 states. 28 states require insurers that cover prescription drugs to provide coverage of the full range of FDA-approved contraception drugs. Women's access to care is absolutely on the line, and they have turned it into a religious versus reproductive freedom debate. Birth control is medication prescribed for women's health, plain and simple. It is not radical. As I said, 28 states already supply it, and roughly 99% of women who are use birth control at some point in their lives. But the only way that they can use it is if they can get it. So the right to choose is absolutely meaningless without the means and access to choice. The President's thoughtful decision allows insurance companies to cover contraceptives. It does not in any way interfere with one's religious beliefs or the beliefs of the church. It does not force anyone to use them, and certainly does not require anyone, churches or anyone else, to cover it. But if it is a university, if it is a major employer that is employing many people, not people of one faith, but many different faiths, then it's required that they follow the law of this country. So let's end this assault on women's health and listen to the millions of Americans who rely on birth control each and every day, and it's important for their health, and I applaud the President and Secretary of Sebelius, and I yield to the great Congresswoman from the great state of California.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the gentlelady for yielding and also for standing up for women's health, not only today and during these very difficult times, but each and every day of your life. As a former devout practicing Catholic, I fully understand and respect the Church's doctrine on contraceptives, and even though I disagree with it, I fully respect it and I understand it. But also, I know that the separation of church and state is a fundamental principle that we must maintain. Mr. Speaker, the administration's decision to provide choices to access to quality, affordable health care, family planning services, including contraceptives, are vital for women's health and well-being. This is really not about a mandate. The rule would not force anyone with a religious objection to use or prescribe FDA-approved contraception. The fact is, the Catholic bishops know that the 335,000 religious institutions and organizations and churches and places of worship, they're exempt. And in fact, no woman will be required to use contraceptives or to even access contraceptives if she does not want to do that. This ruling is about women making their own decisions whether to use contraceptives or not. It's about access. Religion must not force discrimination and discriminatory policies against, for example, an employee who works in the cafeteria of a hospital and chooses to plan her family. She should not be denied this coverage because of where she works. Low-income women finally will have equal access to contraceptive services if they choose. And so we want to make sure tonight that the facts are presented appropriately. And yes, we've witnessed this war against women systematically come against women's health for the last year now. And it's about time we start really being truthful to the public and getting the facts out there and not allow the misinformation to really put women once again in a position of not having access to contraceptive care. So I believe that this decision was right. I know that it allows for religious exemptions, and this rule should allow now for employees, for nurses, for healthcare workers to access contraception when they want to, and if they choose not to, they don't have to. But we should not allow discrimination anymore to take place. Thank you, and I yield now to the gentlelady from California, Congresswoman Lois Capps.
I thank my colleague Barbara Lee from California for yielding time, and I also want to thank our colleague from New York, Nita Lowey, for her leadership in organizing this opportunity for us to speak with one voice, we who are members of Congress and women members of Congress. And speaking for myself, some of us are mothers, our grandmothers, and my career in public health greatly informs what I'm about to say. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of the Obama administration's decision to include contraception in their list, their very important list of preventive services which will make women's health care more affordable. Let us be clear. This was not a political decision on the part of the administration, on the part of our president, nor one intended to attack any religious institution. It was a decision based on extensive science and the expert recommendation made by these scientists with the goal in mind of keeping women and their children healthy. However, a great deal of misinformation has been spread about this rule, and some have decided to again use women's health as a political football. But the truth is that this issue is not as divisive as many would like it to be made out to be. Virtually, almost all women use a form of an FDA-approved birth control at one point or another in their lifetime. This includes 98% of Catholic women as well. And most Americans, men and women, believe that women, not their bosses, women should have the choice of which health care services they can and want to access. But you know, some would have us believe that the administration's rule is in some way radical. It is not. 28 states already require the coverage of contraception in their insurance plans. And the new federal standard is based on one that has worked in my home state of California for many years. It's done so without any religious hospitals dropping coverage or firing any of their employees. It's worked perfectly well. The administration now has made the right call. And I speak on behalf of women in this country urging the administration to stay the course. And now it is my honor and pleasure to yield my time, or our time, to our colleague from Maryland, very appropriate person to speak on this topic, Donna Edwards.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding, and just want to, Mr. Speaker, express today my support for the administration's ruling that provides women and families across this country, no matter their faith, the opportunity to take control of their own reproductive health and to gain access to contraception services. The opposition we're hearing, although very vocal from very few voices, does not adequately reflect the voices of the millions of women across this country who rely on contraception. 99% of women in the United States and 98% of Catholic women already use birth control, and it's estimated that on average women use birth control for 30 years. Polls conducted across the country over the last week also find that more than half of the United States population believes that employers should provide health care plans that cover contraception and birth control at no cost. Unfortunately, over the last week since the administration's ruling, religious leaders have misinterpreted, I believe, and misled the American people on the rule's implications. The exemption in the ruling actually very carefully protects the rights of churches and church associations. The administration justly limits the exemption of institutions whose main purpose is spreading religion and employ and serve people of the same faith. Clearly, the opposition doesn't express this. Extending this exemption beyond these churches to other religious institutions would directly undermine the intent of the health care reform law for the more than 640,000 individuals employed, in particular by Catholic hospitals. And let's be clear. Contrary to what some have said, this ruling has absolutely nothing to do with abortion. In fact, the ruling will save women up to $600 per year and keep their employers from absorbing 15 to 17% increase in health care costs simply not to provide women with contraceptive coverage. Women and families across the country deserve the option to receive the comprehensive contraception coverage if they desire. The rule doesn't prescribe contraception to women. If a woman chooses to exercise her faith and not use contraception, she's free to do so under this ruling. However, limiting access to contraception to any subset of the population would be a direct affront to the scientific and medical recommendations of the Institute of Medicine. Catholic institutions are in an untenable position. After all, where is it that we would draw the line? Should those institutions exercise their role as employers rather than their role in their faith tradition. I would argue that, of course, this is about their role as an employer. What, for example, would the government do if these institutions also believe that they should exempt themselves from paying payroll taxes because they believe that under their faith tradition, people's responsibility is to tithe instead? Would we allow them to self-exempt from payroll taxes? I don't think so. Contraception and maternal health is all a part of a woman's health care, comprehensive health care, just like breast exams, screenings, and well women visits. 50% of pregnancies in this country are unplanned, and it's widely understood that these unplanned pregnancies are not as healthy as planned pregnancies. This can cost taxpayers up to $11 billion a year. And at a time when the other side is slashing budgets and proposing reforms to shift costs to states, this ruling is about as smart as we get for our health care system, for women and families, for babies, and for American taxpayers. Making certain women and families have the opportunity to plan pregnancy is critical for our society. The administration's ruling protects women, families, and babies, eliminates discrimination of one group of women over another, and it's important for us. The ruling respects the religious beliefs and freedoms of all Americans and health care providers, while it ensures that women have the full option to pursue contraception. I stand with my colleagues in support of the administration's rule, look forward to working to expand health care coverage and women's health care coverage, and thank you. And at this time, I'd like to yield to my colleague from Connecticut, the Honorable Rosa DeLauro, who's a true leader for women's health care, and I appreciate her leadership. Thank you.
As both a Catholic and an advocate of women's health, I believe that these guidelines strike the necessary balance between increasing access to health care services for women while respecting the religious beliefs of all Americans. These guidelines are based on recommendations from the Institute of Medicine, a nonprofit independent organization that is grounded and rooted in science. They have recommended that women have access to a wide range of services, such as screening and counseling for domestic violence, that pregnant women have access to services such as a screening for gestational diabetes, that women have access to at least one well-woman preventive care visit a year, and that all women have access to a range of contraceptive services, counseling, and methods. Let me be clear. The Catholic Church and its employees are exempt from these guidelines. They apply only to church institutions that serve the larger community, and employ people of different faiths on a non-religious basis and do not meet the clear requirements for a religious exemption. There are many and thousands of non-Catholics who work in Catholic hospitals and in Catholic universities. Improved access to birth control is directly linked to declines in maternal and infant mortality and helps to reduce unintended pregnancies. That is why 28 states, including Connecticut, already mandate the coverage of contraception, and why many private employers already cover these services. I'm proud to support what I believe to be a moral decision by the administration and a well-crafted compromise that maintains the existing federal conscience protections and at the same time allows women access to contraceptive service and other preventive health care services without mandating, in terms of contraceptive services, that one use it or be required to dispense it. I would like now to yield time to my colleague from Washington, D.C., the Honorable Eleanor Holmes Norton.
Thank the gentlelady for yielding. Mr. Speaker, I think in the next several days and weeks, you're going to see people come forward to speak up for the silent majority in this controversy about contraception and what kinds of institutions should and should not provide them. If ever there has been a silent majority, it is the women of America, particularly the women who may happen to work for Catholic hospitals, for a Catholic university, as I did, for example, when as a Protestant I worked as a tenured professor of law at Georgetown University here in Washington. The Catholic Church has long accepted the laws against discrimination, except as to the church itself and the church's own activities. And so you'll find that in a Catholic hospital or a Catholic church, you must hire people regardless of their race or religion and the like. Now the church seems to be seeking a different rule on how you accommodate for religion. We have accommodated for the Catholic Church when it comes to hiring their own employees, for example. And the administration has accommodated to the Catholic Church when it comes to the provision of contraceptives for those employees. And understand who those employees are. There are hundreds of thousands of women and men who work for hospitals, for universities, and other institutions that hold themselves out as non-discriminatory and as accepting all people. For that reason, the Church, of course, qualifies for federal funds because it is accepted as it is, as acting as a public institution in the place of a public institution. We have a long and treasured history, Mr. Speaker, of religious accommodation. When I chaired the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, I recall the many cases in which we tried to err on the side of accommodation. But the accommodation must never be so broad as to trample on the rights of others, to accommodate the institution which has no conscience and not accommodate the people whose conscience is being trampled, of course, is precisely what the Constitution does not allow. A broad accommodation to the church that would relieve it of offering a health care service that is essential would penalize the rights of thousands of non-Catholics. So whatever the right of the church is, it does not have the right to trample on the rights of others. That's how accommodation works. The administration's own exemption is patterned on identical religious exemptions that have been tested in the courts and found to be constitutional. I think the administration was looking at two things when it fashioned a very, very generous exemption for the church in the health care law. First, it was looking for what was necessary to do as vital to the health care of women. But it was also looking to what was constitutional. And, Mr. Speaker, if I may say so, I believe the broad exemption that the Catholic Church seeks, which would penalize the rights of hundreds of thousands of women who work for them, who are not Catholic, who do not share their views, whether or not they are Catholic on this issue, that if such an exemption were to be granted, then the administration, it seems to me, would find itself engaging in an unconstitutional exemption. The administration has accommodated the church. It has fulfilled its obligation to see to it that women have a vital health care service, and it has prevented an unconstitutional violation. And I'm pleased to yield time now to Mr. Nadler of New York.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding, and I thank her for her excellent exposition as to the law and the constitutionality. with which I am in full agreement. As we all know, the administration recently announced that a popular and critically important component of the health care reform law would guarantee that most women have access to contraceptives paid for by their health insurance. This decision was based on the sound science of the Impartial and Independent Institute of Medicine, which recognized that contraceptives are an essential health service fundamental to improving the lives of women and their families. This decision is a major victory for women. 98% of American women, including a similar percentage of Catholic women, use contraceptives at some point in their lives. Particularly at this time of economic uncertainty, women will have one less cost to worry about. That can be a substantial cost. Make no mistake about it, freeing up $600 or $800 a year will have significant effects on working families. The decision also recognizes and supports religious freedom by providing certain limited exemptions for places of worship, as well as for those organizations that hire and predominantly care for those who share the same religious beliefs. They are protected against being required to violate their religious teachings. I am proud to stand shoulder to shoulder with President Obama and his administration for helping to strike this important balance between religious rights and the rights of women to protect their health. Yet to hear some people talk about this decision, you'd have no idea that the religious organizations and the religiously devout have their liberties protected. Amid all the hyperbole, the truth is that the administration's decision, while significant and important, is hardly new. This measured approach that balances religious rights on the one hand and the rights of women on the other is already the standard in 28 states, including my home state of New York. Because it's not just employers and corporations that have rights at stake, hardworking people and their families also have rights. Under the approach adopted by the administration, universities and hospitals, which serve and employ people from a multitude of faiths and cultures, are not exempt from the requirement that health insurance provide coverage for contraceptives, nor should they be. Women should not be denied a basic health service merely because they work or study at a university or hospital affiliated with a religious organization. The difference here is that churches are and should be protected in their religious role, protected against having to violate their religious views. But they must not be protected in their role as employers. We permit a church, for example, to discriminate in religious practice. No one asks the Catholic Church, how come you do not permit women priests? That's their business. But we do not permit them to discriminate as employers. We do not permit a church-affiliated hospital or university to say we will not permit the hiring of female doctors or female professors or black doctors or nurses, because that would impinge on liberty. And it's that, even if a church has a doctrine against hiring female priests, that's fine. But hiring female professors in the university, unless it's a solely ecclesiastical university, only for religious purposes, if it's a regular university, then they cannot be permitted to have this kind of discrimination. We do not permit, we protect religious liberty, but we cannot permit a church to impose its views on others who may not share those views. The church can preach its views, it can seek to persuade people, but it cannot coerce people who may work for a church-affiliated university or hospital that they may not use contraceptives if they want to. The liberty here is the liberty of the employee that must be protected. The liberty of the church must be protected in its churchly function and in its function as a religious institution. In its function as an employer, their liberty belongs to the employees. And that is the distinction that is made here. It is the proper distinction. Imagine if some other church that thinks that it is wrong to give transfusions to people, blood transfusions, ran a hospital. We would not permit them to let people die in that hospital for lack of transfusions, because it's not up to them to decide the medical practice by their religious doctrine. If the person wants to refuse treatment because his religious doctrine says, I don't want a transfusion, that's his liberty. But we must not confuse the religious liberty of the church to propagate its views and to conduct its religious affairs as it sees fit with the liberty of employees in a secular institution
that are run by the church or affiliated with the church to have the normal protections against discrimination and the normal rights that we afford all people. And that is why the administration's decision to say that contraceptives are scientifically a necessary health care service which must be provided by health insurance is right, and any attempt by a religious institution to say that they should be exempt from having employees allowed to get contraceptives paid for is wrong, and I applaud the administration for making the proper distinction to protect the liberty of the employees and the religious liberty of the church, both. Thank you. And I yield to the distinguished gentleman from New Jersey, Mr.